Okay, thanks very much indeed, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this democratic process. Hopefully, the weight of the voices of the people that you're hearing will carry through into the appropriate destination for this bill. So, I co-chair Health Coalition Aotearoa. It's an alliance of over 60 health and community groups advocating for regulations to reduce the harm from our three biggest killers. That's tobacco, alcohol, and ultra-processed food. So, between those three, they create about a third of our preventable annual health loss. So we are very keen on good regulations, but we strongly endorse the thousands of submitters who have pointed out these things that you've probably heard over and over again about the bill failing three times and very narrow principles, no necessity, environmental, health or social impact, overwhelming opposition to the bill from the public, from scholars and experts, government agencies and so on. So we believe that this bill is unequivocally not the best way to improve the quality of regulations. But I'd just like to be able to put the public health risks that this bill poses. And the problem that we face in trying to get regulations to prevent harm is not so much that the existing regulations that we have are poor and have been badly written. No, it's that we have too few regulations to constrain the corporate power and the corporate exploitation of people, especially those who are struggling the hardest. So we have this regulatory chill. So New Zealand does very poorly on this front of regulating harm products. We have, for example, no effective regulations to protect children from marketing of alcohol and ultra-processed foods, to control the nicotine and addiction-enhancing chemicals in cigarettes, to prevent the high density of fast food outlets and so on. So this regulatory chill, the lack of regulations, is the threat of pushback from the corporations, and that rather prevents politicians from making the policies in the first place. And this bill, we believe, will undoubtedly increase the levers for regulatory chill, perhaps turning it into a regulatory freeze. So I just want to give a very concrete example of this. So in Australia, Nicola Roxon was a very rare example of a brave health minister who really understood the value of regulations and improving health. And in 2011, she led the passage of the plain packaging of cigarettes into law. So, of course, the government was immediately taken to the High Court by the tobacco industry. Philip Morris changed its headquarters to Hong Kong so that it could use a free trade agreement with Australia and take Australia to an investor state dispute tribunal, and the industry supported challenges through the World Trade Organizations. So these legal challenges to this piece of public health regulation were multiple. And what were the grounds that the industry used to prosecute its case against the Australian government? Well, it was the acquisition of property and rights without compensation. It's trademarks, designs and colours and so on that would be unfairly taken away, and the government was not going to compensate them for it. And this is exactly the same provisions that are in this bill. So did these challenges succeed, legal challenges? No, they didn't. But the process ran for 9 years, including all the appeals. It cost the Australian government more than $50 million to defend it. And it was only after these cases were settled that countries like New Zealand were able to drop the regulatory chill on that and actually implement it ourselves. So they did achieve an increase in regulatory chill for nearly a decade. And so while the officials in the Ministry of Regulations tried to reassure me that corporations would not be able to succeed in using this bill if it passed into law in the same way, I think it's very naive to think that the industry would not weaponize the privileging of its private property and rights in this bill. In fact, this is what this bill is designed to do. So in our view, the best outcome from this select committee process is that it upholds democracy against the ideological drive of a minor party by listening to the people and implementing other ways of achieving better regulation that the Ministry for Regulation and the other government agencies and all the experts that you're hearing from are recommending. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boyd. We'll go to Mark Cameron.
Afternoon, Boyd. Thank you so much for joining us on the select committee process. Boyd, would you be aware that the second chief concern of the constituency currently is that the health sector is underfunded and under-resourced and having a productivity crisis? Now, that's the constituency saying that. What do you think the reason for the constituency being so concerned about the health sector in general would be?
Yeah, so the constituency sees health largely as hospitals and GPs and so on, and that surely is overworked. A lot from these preventable diseases for which there are regulations around alcohol, ultra-processed food leading to obesity, diabetes, car crashes, alcohol problems, tobacco and so on. There are plenty of good regulations which we have not implemented in this country, which would help reduce the pressure on healthcare services. So, yep, hospitals are visible and people see that as a concern, but really we're not doing the prevention well, and that's because we do not have enough good regulations.
Okay, Boyd, as a supplementary, thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, how do you then square, sir, that we've gone in 5 years from spending $18 billion on health to now $32 billion, and yet outcomes are worse? Do you think, sir, that there's a case of that we've got, in some instances, poor regulations that perhaps maybe the Ministry of Regulation could weed out so we actually get better productivity to the doctors and nurses?
Yes, I'm not sure what those regulations are
understaffed
that are creating that. I'm talking about the prevention side, where we simply just do not have good enough regulations. And I think that this bill will add to that problem. I don't think it's going to reduce it. I think we should be taking the advice of the experts and the agencies about better ways to regulate.
No further questions. Thank you, Boyd.
Thank you,
Mark. Francisco.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your submission, Boyd. One of the things that I'm interested in your submission was you mentioned how there was skepticism you expressed about the reassurances you've had from the Ministry for Regulation officials. They've said to us that Section 24, which is that the Act doesn't confer any legal rights or obligations, means that the corporations being able to use this to have a regulatory chill, those concerns aren't valid. Can you explain why you still have concerns despite that assurance, Boyd?
Well, I think that the history shows that these industries with very deep pockets will use whatever legal levers they can. And I use the example of the tobacco and the Australian one, which was pretty clear. But we've seen that also in New Zealand with the alcohol policies, with supermarkets and the alcohol industry preventing the introduction or the proper introduction and implementation of local alcohol policies. So I do think we need good regulations in there to be able to prevent the corporations from weaponizing it and using it. In the end, it may well fail, but don't forget that they are trying to delay and create more chill for these regulations to be in place.
We're still just in time. Megan Wood's question.
Thank you, Boyd, for your submission. I share your view that the best case scenario is that this bill doesn't pass into law. But we have heard from a previous submitter that if it is going to be passed into law, some suggested amendments, one of which was that it doesn't apply to existing regulations, so it's not a retrospective piece of legislation. Just wondered around your views on that.
Yes, I've seen quite a bit of commentary about its use on retrospective legislation, and I think there's a whole lot of uncertainty about what that's going to mean. I'm not an expert in that space. I think the biggest problem to me sits in the principles that this is privileging a couple of things that need to be taken into account, not the totality of what needs to be taken into account. So if the bill was going to be amended to make it more useful and have better impacts, those principles would need to include all of these things that the submitters are including, and that will then follow into the other regulations and probably then applied to retrospective legislation if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, thank you. We have met time.
It's interesting that has been brought up while listening to this. I thought about the Supreme Court case about the district licensing with Progressive, ironically Countdown, that later became Woolworths, where they tried to force Auckland Council, Hauraki Council, they were two that I know, was to force them to abide by the default legislation in the law, including in the case of Hauraki, planning to take the council to court because they wanted a liquor license to be issued to finish 2 hours after their shop trading hours finished. So that was something of, and I wonder, would a regulatory standards bill prevent, say, that case going to court? But interesting point about, trying to delay the inevitable.
Yeah, possibly. Because from my knowledge, a lot of the basis of the regulatory standards bill sort of comes back to a theorem, sort of alt-right neoliberal theorem called Coase theorem, which is all about sort of resolving things outside of the public sector, or at least like public, outside of public legislation, less legislation, and it's more people take financial action against suing other parties. I think one of the examples they give is a factory emitting smoke that damages nearby residents' health, and the outcome may depend on other rights. If the citizens have a right to clean air, the factory can negotiate with them, perhaps paying them to tolerate the pollution. That's one of the examples. Another scenario, outcome, of that same scenario might be if the factory has the right to pollute, residents can negotiate with the factory, paying it to reduce emissions. So that's a part of Coase theorem. So that's sort of like what I see the bill flirting with a lot. Is that kind of concept there, where essentially the government takes a step back from a lot of this regulation and just allows people based on their rights to sort of just sue each other in the aftermath, which is not a good way to go about things. People die, you know. I love this submission. He's speaking to a lot of things that I go on about. Particularly, I love how he brought up the tobacco regulations and linked that back to other things like sugar and alcohol use. Really, I don't see why we don't apply those same restrictions and criticisms that we do the tobacco industry to sugar and alcohol and all these other problematic, processed foods. I think there should be more warnings on sugar packets and stuff like that. Processed food.
I mean, there's technically no regulations when it comes to sugar on standards at all.
Yeah.
Yes, we have that with alcohol. Like when it comes to license, any product that has more than 1.15% alcohol in it has to have a liquor license. So you can buy your cider vinegar, but you can't buy your bottle of wine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing is alcohol advertising. That's like just with alcohol in this country and how we consume it, within our culture and our communities, it's insane that we don't have more regulation on advertising. It's crazy. Going out on my morning walk down the light path or something, you're bombarded with billboards for freaking like Jim Beam and all this shit and whatever the newest.
You brought up an interesting point about alcohol regulation. So this is a thing that happened in Wellington with the Metlink buses. School buses were not allowed to be used if they were what is it called? The bus that had alcohol advertising couldn't be used on school buses because you wouldn't want to have Jack Daniel's whiskey and then have the school bus sign planted at the back of it. And there was also it was a anti-smoking legislation, and on the board that had the school bus sign sat there and said, instead of it saying smoking kills, it changed it when they hoped that it was school kills. So that was, and I wonder what would happen in that situation with Greater Wellington Regional Council that has an official embargo on that to be allowed to continue that with their bus services they contract out to their 4 providers.
Auckland just initiated their own sort of restrictions on alcohol sales. They now stop at 9, for example, and the alcohol companies could potentially, under this legislation, take them to court for loss of profits, for example.
So 9 what?
9 p.m. closing time.
Oh, okay.
Which is interesting because Wellington used to be 11, then it dropped to 10.
Yeah.
I'm just loving this conversation. It's really enjoyable listening to you about it.
You're learning things.
Yeah, details. Absolutely. I thought it was interesting that. So I really appreciated what Detective Rogers said, which, if I can summarise, is that enabling people to just sue each other is not good for social health. And I was really interested in what this is a health group submission said. I really liked his answer in response to Mark Cameron asking if there are bad regulations that are being removed. He talked about good regulations that aren't being implemented. And you guys are talking in relation to alcohol about the need for more regulation, but he talked about the fact that we don't implement effectively the good regulations that we do have. I mean, it shouldn't necessarily be baby in bathwater. So, and he also talked about the reach of the chill factor of bad laws like the Regulatory Standards Bill on the decisions that are made in boardrooms and on people's desks for decades. And that's because regulation becomes a kind of education. And that's my own giving myself a doorway to say the alternative, which, so what the libertarians say about health regulations is that people should make their own choices. And it's free will. And there is something in that, but that's what makes regulation the partner of education.
Yeah. I mean, a good one that we interact with every day, the give way rule in intersections.
It certainly helps if private profit is not maximised by encouraging unhealthy consumption, sad people and risk-taking behaviours.
Yeah.
You know, because they love bomb people about their products, and they're not helping avoidance one bit. But it is actually important to acknowledge that good regulation should also be partnered with good social messaging about health. Not if you want to do it, it's just down there on the corner dairy.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to the next submitter. Was it next submitter on there, which is, was it Louis Board or Lewis Board? One of the two. So